Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this video today. Today, we are joined by Michael Doering, an artist recently featured in Culture Arts Collective's Modern Renaissance magazine. So, hello, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Can you start off by telling our viewers a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I live in Reno, Nevada. I've got my studio, do my artwork here in Reno. I was originally from Iowa, born in a small town, Mason City, Iowa, went to University of Iowa, got my BFA in drawing and printmaking there, many years ago. Uh, and then I ended up moving to Las Vegas and lived in Las Vegas for, oh God, maybe 15 years. But basically, I took kind of a detour on my art journey. Didn't do any artwork for a long period of time. I went into education, became a teacher, counselor, principal, executive director, wife, and three kids. And I kind of regret the fact that I got away from it, but honestly, took a big break from art and just started getting back into it maybe about 5 years ago, and have kind of really been hitting it hard, and I'm super happy that I'm doing it. So
That's great. So, I asked you about your background. So, I'll start by asking you what inspired you to become an artist in the first place?
well, as I said, I grew up in a smaller town in Iowa, and I didn't really have any formal art education. No one in my family was into art, so not a lot of exposure to art, not any exposure to like museums, galleries, anything like that. But when I grew up, I just always loved to draw. And even as a small child, just drawing all the time. Uh, and did most of it just with what was available, whether it be like lined notebook paper, ballpoint pens, whatever. Uh, and just really gravitated to that and really loved it. I took art classes in school, but I mean, I have to admit that even the classes that I took, I wouldn't say a lot of formal instruction. It was
Mhm.
almost just kind of, I don't want to say free time, but in many ways, it almost seemed like that.
Mhm.
When I went to college, I was going to major. I was also really good in math, and I was going to major in engineering or architecture. But I took art classes just as electives because I always liked art. And uh, and basically, I think I was in my freshman, sophomore year of college. The instructor took me out in the hallway and just talked to me and said, "Hey, I really think you have a lot of talent, and I think you ought to consider majoring in art." And not that I'm going to say it's all based just on that one conversation, but I think it really, maybe I was an impressionable person. I don't know, but it seemed to have a big impact on me, and I ended up changing my major to art. And then I had another instructor that was pretty influential for me, kind of at that time when I was in school, and kind of had the same talk with me, and other students giving me positive comments as well. And maybe I'm the type of person who kind of thrives on getting positive feedback from some people, but I think that really shaped me, and I think that's what kind of inspired me to kind of go into it.
That's great. So let's move into your artwork now. Who would you say are your biggest artistic influences?
Definitely two-dimensional work. I mostly, well, not mostly, I only do painting, printmaking, obviously drawing too. I don't really do any sculpture work, ceramics, anything else, even though I've done some in the past. So definitely people that do two-dimensional work. And I would say my biggest influences are some of the post-impressionists. I love Cezanne. I love Van Gogh. Uh, Also, some of the contemporary portrait painters, Alice Neel, Lucian Freud. Uh, I love the kind of the expressive quality of how they do portraits. Probably my biggest influences, though, are some of the German expressionist painters. I love Max Beckmann, Otto Dix. I would say those are some of my biggest influences. But I would say almost any. I would say I lean more towards, even though I'm rattling off people from history, there's still more of a modern kind of expressive style of painting and working. Uh, I mean, I have a lot of respect for some of the great masters, from Renaissance era, whatever. And I know they were super talented, but I like kind of more of the modern style better, and kind of the creativity and the bold colors, brush strokes, etc. So I would say those are my bigger influences.
And when you're creating your artwork, how do you begin your process?
Well, I've made kind of a shift, and I'll just kind of say briefly how I used to do it and how I do it now. And how I used to do it is I was for a while there, I did nothing but pure abstract work, abstract expression. And I was a firm believer that, if you're gonna pre-plan things, you're gonna kind of ruin it, and it's not gonna be authentic. It's not gonna be, from the soul or from your gut. And so I literally would just whatever came to me, that's what I did. And I would say I did that for, oh God, again, I've only been doing art again for about 5 years. So maybe for the first 2 or 3 years, that's purely what I did. So if anyone, were to visit my website, look back at some of my older work, that was my process. Uh, wouldn't overthink things, just totally went with the flow, purely worked in that style. Uh, Again, I said earlier, and maybe I need to work on this, but sometimes I think I'm impacted, sometimes maybe a little too much by what people tell me. But I uh, I don't really have uh, kind of an art network in person, but I communicate with a lot of people on social media, and I've got which has been good for me. I mean, I have a ton of people that I get feedback from, I communicate with. And there was one person, and I won't name his name because it kind of hit me a little hard, but there was one person who was offering to do formal critiques. It was something that you actually, you would sign up for. You'd have to schedule it with him. You'd pay. Pretty well known or semi famous abstract artist. And I did the formal critique with him. And I do think a lot of what he said was accurate, but just really kind of was a big blow because it was just, I mean, it was brutal. I mean, it was harsh. And a lot of it was, I can tell that you're not putting any planning into this. I can tell that, I mean, it was just like what the heck are you doing? I like almost like this is horrible. And and it really kind of rocked my world because I was getting a lot of positive feedback at that time. I'd already had my artwork in a number of gallery shows, and not necessarily solo shows, but I apply for a lot of open calls and juried shows, and I'm like thinking, wow, I'm actually went into this critique thinking, this is going to be great. But after that, I kind of really took a step back and I said, I need to really be more thoughtful about what I'm doing. I can still have an expressive quality. I still want to have kind of a freedom to go in the moment. And I'm not a super rigid person that everything has to be planned out. But after that, I really started thinking a lot about what I'm doing, what I'm trying to say, what colors I'm using, and composition, etc. And so what I do now is much more thoughtful. I guess is what I would say. And a lot of my art is based either on personal stories. It could be memories from my past. It could be and some of it's humorous. I mean, it could be like a funny story when I was growing up, or something that I just, have in my mind still. Might be something I see, just kind of out and about, something that, is interesting to me. Uh, and what I generally do is I just kind of note it, and I note it on my phone. I'll just kind of make a little note and I'll say, just kind of almost send myself a little message or type it into my phone. I keep a running list of ideas of things that I think would be good for paintings. And a lot of them, I look back, I usually sit on them a while because a lot of them I'll look back and I'll say, what the heck? Why am I doing that? There's no way I'm going to do that painting. Like, that's stupid, whatever. And I can, but I keep my little list. I look at it. I got things kind of on the back burner. Once I decide that I'm doing it, uh, usually what I do then is I work out a sketch, uh, and I put a lot of thought now. And I don't know if people could tell or not by looking at my work, but I really have consciously been putting a lot of thought into color schemes and composition. Even if it's kind of a semi-abstracted piece, I'm going to think about, okay, what colors am I going to use? Why am I using these colors? Uh, and that was totally foreign to me. I never did that in my entire life. And honestly, I kind of feel like I've really been doing a lot of self-instruction, going back really, although I have a degree in art, I kind of went to school when it was it was just a little different. I mean, it was
Mhm.
kind of like kind of X kind of, maybe 60s hippie generation that was just, wow, man, just paint whatever you want. And not a lot of instruction. But I think good, well-known artists who were the instructors, but it was almost like a free time. And that was a lot of my art instruction growing up. So I really in the past couple of years almost feel like I've kind of gone back to school, but just on my own. Doing a lot of reading about color theory, things like this, composition, what have you. I don't know if I answered that or not. That's
Yeah,
kind of
that
what
was
my process is.
no, that was great.
Okay.
Um, I know that each piece of artwork is different, but do you try to evoke a certain emotion out of the viewer when you're painting?
I That's a good question. I sometimes, I would say again, every painting is different. I would say a lot of my work, to be honest with you, I don't know that I'm thinking, at least consciously thinking about creating an emotional impact for the viewer. What I'm really doing, I don't want to say I'm just painting for myself, but sometimes I kind of feel like, okay, I've got something that I want to say or something that I want to put on canvas. And I really almost kind of feel like I'm just cathartic or just kind of letting it out, number one. But then I also, and especially now that I'm doing kind of more pre-planning or whatever, a lot of times I feel like I'm telling a story or sharing kind of a message or trying to put a unique character out there. And more than anything, I'm just kind of hoping that people maybe can kind of relate to it. And maybe that'll create an emotional response for them, maybe not. But generally, I'm not consciously thinking, hey, I want this to be a sad painting, or I want this to kind of create, excitement or anger or whatever. I think it's more kind of hoping that the people will at least connect with it or relate to it, even though it may be kind of something a little personal to me.
That's great. I know that you said that you took a long break from creating artwork, but what has been the most important thing that you've learned about yourself as an artist throughout your career making art?
I would say number one, well, I probably a few things. I would say number one, and I kind of already mentioned it, just always, always open to learning and being a lifelong learner. And the other thing I've learned in my life, and not just art, but I really can see, and I guess everybody's different. You don't have to, to learn something, even though I spent a lot of years in education, you don't have to necessarily take a class or take a lesson or go back to school or what have you. If you do, that's wonderful, but there's just so much you can learn on your own. Especially in this modern world of either looking things up, and I'm constantly doing that. I'm constantly trying to look back at people from the past, but also just different techniques, read up on things. So I would say lifelong learner is one thing. Uh, the other thing that has been that I probably wouldn't have guessed. I always thought that I had kind of pretty thick skin. And once you start putting your art out there, it's one, and this is me, everybody's different, I guess. But it's one thing if you're just doing the art for yourself and you're just kind of looking at it yourself. But as soon as you put it out there, even family and friends, you'd be, I mean, I don't know if you'd be surprised, but some people would be surprised at some of the reactions you can get. Like it's almost like what the heck is this? Or, the blank stare or what have you. And I guess one thing I've learned is, I mean, the obvious things, and I think every artist would say this, oh, we love making art, and I'm in my own world when I'm making art. I'm, just kind of it, it just kind of flows and everything's wonderful and all of that. I mean, all of that. But I would say the number one, the importance of kind of being lifelong learning, how you can always adapt, how you can always grow, how you can always kind of experiment or improve in your craft. Number two is maybe just kind of the vulnerability that when you put your art out there, especially if you're going to show your art, you're really sharing. And I think fellow artists would maybe understand this or know it, but I don't know if a lot of the non-artists really understand that when you really put something out there, you're kind of sharing a piece of yourself and maybe the importance of kind of developing thick skin if you're going to do that, because some of the reactions you get are going to be mixed, and I guess that's something that I've learned and I kind of still struggle with.
When you come across a creative block when you're making something, how do you work past that?
I read somewhere recently, and I think this is totally true. And it said, I can't even remember who said it. Maybe it might even have just been a meme. I don't know. But it said discipline is more important than motivation. And it said, because there's going to, and no matter what it is, it could be working out, it could be doing a diet, it could be whatever. But motivation, we're all going to have periods of time where you're not motivated. I mean, that's just life. I mean, that's human nature, psychology, what have you. You're going to be unmotivated. Creative block, I think, is kind of similar to unmotivated. I mean, we could dissect that, but I think it's kind of similar. And to me, if you're disciplined, the difference between that and motivation is it's almost like you're going to force yourself to do it, even if you're not motivated. And that's kind of what I do, I guess. I think and I do have my periods where I'm just could call it a creative block, but I think a lot of times it's just simply lack of motivation, or maybe varying degrees of maybe just even feeling a little down or depressed or whatever. I have found if I just force myself to start doing something, start doing artwork, start doing a project, generally I'm going to feel better. Generally, I'm going to get back in the flow and it's going to start happening again. The other thing that I would say is I've got my system where I've got my running list of ideas. I would probably tap into that and just kind of almost, I mean, maybe it sounds bad, but I would just force myself to say, hey, I've been sitting on this idea for a while. I'm just going to force myself. I'm going to do it. And once I start doing it, it may kind of start off a little rocky, but once I get into it, it usually kind of blossoms into something pretty decent. The last thing I would maybe say too, and maybe slightly the same, slightly different, I think sometimes it's good to, and some of them are self-created, but maybe like some deadlines, like if there's a deadline or a sense of urgency, and that could be, let's say I'm applying for a show. Uh, then I'm like, hey, I got to get this done, or there's a deadline. Now that's an obvious one, but one thing that I do with my website is I put out a newsletter. I used to do it every month, and then I kind of felt like it was too much. So now I do it 4 times a year, quarterly. I mean, I could easily dog that and say I'm not going to do it at all. Or if I missed a quarter, I don't think anyone's going to notice. But even right now, I've been working pretty hard on a few paintings because I'm going, hey, my newsletter is coming up in another week or two. And there's not a single person out there that would even know or probably would care if I didn't put it out. But that kind of little deadline in my mind is again kind of giving me the discipline to kind of plug through. So that's what I would do.
Can you tell us about a project you're currently working on?
Yeah, I've got, let me see if I can explain it. I've got four paintings that I'm working on, at least for me, and I have done bigger works than this, and I know everything's relative to different people. But they're fairly large paintings by what I typically do. They're 36 by 36 inches, and I've got four of them, and and I'm working on all of them at the same time, and that's something else that I like to do. Rather than just putting all my energy into one painting, I do a little bit on one and then I set it off to the side, work on another, and I kind of am bouncing between four different paintings. Uh, it would actually, similar to the last question, I kind of was in a little bit of a funk, I think, where I hadn't done anything in a while. And this would be an example where I said, I'm going to do these four paintings. And I used to do some pretty big paintings, but I've been kind of doing small work for a while. So I've had these canvases sitting there and literally just kind of staring at me. And I've been kind of putting it off. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to do it. But what I've been working on recently, and I don't know if this is going to sound good or not, but I love doing printmaking. And what I have found is there's a small little, when I say small, I guess it's relative, but there's a small group of people that like printmaking. Seems like there's a lot of people who don't have a huge appreciation for it. Just to be honest, I mean, that's kind of what I have seen. But I love to do it, love to work on it. Uh, but I've noticed when I put paintings out there, it's like, oh, wow, this is great. You do a print and it's like, what's that? And, but that's been my observation.
Mhm.
So I have a number of prints that I have just kind of sitting here that I've done in the past. And one of the things I've been working on recently is I'm trying to say, well, how can I do printmaking and make it more maybe appetizing or maybe more sexy to the general population?
Mhm.
And so I've been mixing it into my paintings. I'm taking prints and I'm kind of using it almost like a collage and finding ways to kind of combine it into various paintings. So the current work I'm working on, everything I've done so far with that technique has been I come up with a fresh idea and I try to find I create like a new fresh print or a couple of prints and how can I work them into a painting, etc. What I'm working on now is I actually went back, looked at my old prints, ones that I thought were good that I don't feel were received maybe as well as they should have been. And I'm basically repurposing them. And so I've got four different ones that I'm kind of working into really kind of more modern looking pieces. And a lot of my work has to do with contrast. I don't want to ramble on, but a lot of my work is uh it could be realism contrasted with abstract.
Mhm.
Old-fashioned woodcut printmaking contrasted with super modern painting techniques or graffiti or something like this. And so you really have kind of these contrasting techniques within the piece. But also I try to kind of work in some contrasting, maybe ideas or things to get people to look at things in a different way. So that's what I'm working on right now. I guess I don't know if I gave enough detail,
Mhm.
but I've got four fairly large pieces where I'm really kind of trying to blend uh, some prints that I had previous and but kind of creating some pretty modern, I guess you would call kind of a mixed media pieces.
I want to ask you about what advice you would give to aspiring artists. You've already talked about staying motivated and being vulnerable. Would you say that those are most important thing when you're starting out in art, or is there something else?
I I would say that I mean for me, I would say that those are I think and sometimes you just I guess the number one thing that I would say is I'll rattle off a few things, and I've already kind of said some of this.
Mm.
I and I've worked with a lot of young people as an educator over the years, but I have a lot of people who I interact with on, Instagram, social media, what have you. Some of them are young. I'm not trying to say young versus old, but I've noticed, especially with some of the young people, but I guess it could be anyone, they're doing their artwork, but I don't think they're really thinking too much about the history of art that came before them. And I know that's kind of heavy for some folks, and they're like, well, no, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm doing this. I really think that a lot of people's art would take a big step forward, whatever that means. And different people look at art differently
Mhm.
if they spent more time looking at art history. And that's not, so some people that maybe cringe and say, oh, that's boring, whatever. It's not. I mean, if you really dig into it and really look and try to learn from some folks who came before you, I would say that would be my first piece of advice. The other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to apply for shows. And that comes with the vulnerability. And I think that's kind of how you learn some of those other lessons I was talking about, because I think a lot of people make their art and they just kind of make it for themselves. They may post it on social media. Some people don't even do that. But if you put it out there and you post it, number one, number two, you start applying for shows, you start doing this, then it's kind of a, I don't know, kind of a different ball game, and you really learn kind of some of those other things about the art market, just kind of about the whole art culture, I guess. And then the other thing is, never stop learning. I see plenty of people that, and this is maybe just one of my pet peeves, but some people I guess love to do this. I see a lot of folks who kind of get in I don't know if I'd say it's a rut, because some of them I think actually do pretty well with their art, but they seem like they just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I guess I would encourage people to say, hey, break out of your comfort zone, try some new things. Even when things are going well, you could just sit there and, kind of have it in cruise control and keep doing the same thing. But I'm a big believer, push yourself, try something different. One step back, two steps forward type of thing. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. Uh, I would say those are some of the main things. Maybe also if you could find a cheerleader or two. And I guess it depends on your personality type, but like I said, sometimes I think you need some thick skin in this business. And if you have somebody that can kind of, give you some positive, honest feedback, but also some positive strokes, I think that helps. So that would be, I guess, my advice.
That's great. The last question I had for you is, how did you find Culture Arts Collective, and what about us stood out to you?
I actually, the first thing I did, I applied to be in one of your virtual shows, and it was, and like I said, I've got a fairly decent number of people who I interact with on social media, and one of the people had been in some of your shows in the past, and she had connected with me and just had suggested, hey, have you ever checked this site out? Have you ever? And I'm like, no, no, don't know anything about it. And she said, well, they're doing a show. I think you should apply. So I looked at it, and it looked interesting, and just kind of really looked at your guys' site, and was in that show and started following you, joined the mail list, and so then I get kind of more updates. Uh, I believe I got an email, which was part of the mail list, about the Modern Renaissance magazine. So I was recently in that, which I thought was awesome. I wasn't even familiar with the magazine, to be honest, but I was just kind of blown away of how nice it was and how professional, and that was, so that was wonderful. And now I'm doing this interview here, so I'm no, I'm happy. I think it's a great group, and I appreciate you guys connecting with me.
Well, that's all the questions I had for you. So I want to thank you for joining us. But before we go, would you like to tell our viewers where they can see your work?
Yeah, I've got my website, which is michaeldoring.com. Doring is Doering, but it's michaeldoring.com is my website. I put out a newsletter every quarter, so if you go to my site, you can do that. I also am on Instagram, which is michael.doring.art. Michael.doring.art on Instagram. And I have a YouTube channel as well, which I think is the same as my Instagram, but but I just recently started posting some things on YouTube. So I would say the main thing would be hopefully you can follow me on Instagram and check out my website, maybe join my newsletter. Uh, Again, I apply for a lot of shows and what have you. Most of the shows that I'm in are in California, but I've done some all around the country. But the main things I would say would be Instagram and my website.
That's great. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see more of your work with us in the future.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You